All right, I think it is enough time for us to have waited. Thank you to everybody that has joined us this evening. My name is Bethany Pearson. I am the program coordinator for the Everett Rail Marshfield Public Library, and I am very happy to be able to host the Wood County Master Gardener Volunteers. And this evening we have Donna with us for her Reading Seed Catalogs for a Successful Garden Experience presentation. I am going to just quickly note, if you have any issues with hearing something or anything technical related, any general comments, you can use the chat feature. And if you have any questions that are specific to the topic or general gardening questions, please use the Q&A. The general questions I will assist with throughout if I'm able to, or I'm having trouble speaking tonight, or let Donna know if we're having an issue and I need her to pause. But the questions that are specifically related to the program, we will keep in the Q&A so that when we take a natural break, whether it's between a slide or saved until the end, we are able to address them in order at that time. You can put comments down at any point whenever you think about them. You don't have to worry like you're going to interrupt us. Please drop them right away and we will address them when we have the opportunity. But I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to pass everything on over to Donna.
Okay, that's a pretty generalized talk. Some of our talks in the past have been more geared towards the area where I garden, which would be a zone 4. However, what we're talking about here tonight applies to just about everybody. So you don't have to worry about what I say that might not apply to you. I'm going to talk a little bit first about why do I want to buy seeds from a catalog. Actually, there's 3 pretty good reasons. Variety is probably the biggest reason. As you will see, there are a great number of different varieties of each species of plants that we can grow. When you go to a garden center, for example, they may have 2 or 3 kinds of tomatoes to choose from. I have a catalog that I look at when I'm looking for vegetables, one called Totally Tomatoes, in which there are probably over 100 different varieties for plants that would suit almost any need, from short season to long season, and any kind of tomato you want and any color you want it in. So variety is probably the biggest reason why you might go and look at some seed catalogs before you buy seeds for your garden. Another reason is quality. People who are in the seed business, the seed suppliers who sell directly to you, strive to have the best performing plants that they have so they can get you to return every year because you'll be a satisfied customer. Many of them develop their own varieties to meet customer needs, and they go to great pains to make sure that the seeds are fresh and of the highest quality. When you buy seeds from a local grocery store or a big box store, they are not always concerned with seed quality or conditions of storage or that sort of thing. Packages are often smaller and have less information on them, which leads to the third reason, is the amount of information you can glean from a seed catalog. Seed catalogs have tons of information beyond what can be printed on the back of a seed packet. Many provide additional information on their websites about hints for getting the best results from the seeds that they sell you. So let's take a look at some considerations when you're looking for seeds. Some of the things you're going to take into consideration involve the site where you are going to be planting this plant. What type of soil do you have? There are 3 basic types: sandy, loam, and clay. Loam is the best one if you are lucky enough to have that. It's a mixture of sand and clay, and it is probably the best for growing most plants. However, some plants do prefer sandier soils, especially things like carrots who like a loose, deep soil, and they would probably do better in something that has more sand or more of a sandy type. Also look at the moisture where you're going to be planting these seeds. Is it an area that drains really well, or it's in the sun where it dries out fairly quickly? Or is it an area where rain and that sort of thing tends to stay, and it stays quite moist. Most vegetables like to be at least have a reasonable amount of moisture in the soil, but there are some flowers, when you're looking at flower seeds, that actually prefer a much drier growing condition than you might think about. Also look at the sun exposure. Most vegetables need full sun exposure. There are a few that will grow in partial sun, but if you're looking at flower seeds, you want to make sure that you are buying seeds for the area that you're going to be planting them in. Do the flowers like full sun or full shade, or will they do well in something of a little bit in between? Or do they like maybe part sun, but will be able to work in sunny areas, or part sun and will be able to live in a shady area? You also want to look at the hardiness zone and the number of growing days you have. Growing days are more important for vegetables because it takes the plant that long it's called days to maturity. It takes the plant that long to grow to its full size and then to produce the vegetables. And in flowers, you're going to be looking for what's the bloom season, for example, and does the flower have any other characteristics that make it interesting to look at even when it's not in bloom. And then, of course, you're probably going to want to, where we are in this part of Wisconsin, we're in zone 4. Which means that any plant that says it's for 4 or a lower number will grow here. And if you are looking at a plant with a higher number like zone 5, that may be, it may be harder for the plant to survive here unless it's grown in a protected area or mulched well in the winter. And sometimes that's not even enough. And another thing to look at is the number of growing days, which means how many days are there between the last frost in the spring and the first frost in the fall. In zone 4, we average about 136 frost-free days. So if you're looking, for example, at vegetables that take 120 days to mature, you may not get 120 days if you happen to have a late spring frost or an early spring frost. Let's do that again. A late spring frost or an early fall frost, you may not get the full maturity to the vegetables. I'm sorry, my mouse keeps moving here. I don't know if it's, I'm not touching it and it's kind of moving by itself. And then the last thing to look at is size of your garden or flower bed. So you know about how many plants you can probably put in there. I'm going to try to show you a video here. We hope that this works about picking seeds. And this is, he's describing some of the characteristics of the different seeds that you'll be looking for. So we'll see if this works. Get the right one. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, some things that you need to look for then in seed selection. Now we're talking about the actual seeds, not where you're planting them. So this is the seed selection, not the site selection. There are some considerations, especially when you're looking at flower seeds. Planting, are you planting an annual or a perennial? An annual will grow and flower in 1 year. A perennial will sometimes take a year or two to flower for the first time, but then it continues to flower for many years after without you having to replant it. You might want to also look at the size and type. When we're talking about vegetables, we have lots of different kinds of vegetables that even come in different sizes and different types.
Donna, we're not seeing your presentation. It's so lovely. I thought we would like to see it.
Okay, let's try it again.
Tonight is the night of technical issues, I guess. It's our first program of the year. That's what it is.
Now I'm clicking, oh, wait. Try this again. There we go. You see it now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. All right. Size and type. for example, you can get cucumbers that can grow really, really long stems. And then you can also get bush cucumbers. The same thing with melons and squash and those kinds of things. You can get bush beans or pole beans. Bush beans form a little bush, maybe at the most 2 feet high, whereas pole beans can grow up to 9 or 10 feet, and they have to be grown on some kind of a fence or a pole. So there's lots of different kinds, just as in flowers, there's lots of different kinds of, for example, zinnias or any other kinds of flowers that we're looking at. Another thing to look for, is it organic or conventional seed? Conventional seed means that it was grown on a farm or a place, and they could have used our chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides when they were growing it. If you're getting organic seed, that seed was grown under organic conditions, which means just using non-chemical fertilizers and insecticides and that sort of thing. If you're going to grow organic vegetables that you want to sell, or if a person is an organic farmer, they have to start with organic seed and then grow it without any other chemicals. So it might be important to someone who is growing vegetables for the fact that they want to sell it as an organic vegetable. For the homeowner, it's more of a personal choice. Do you want to have an organic seed, or do you not mind how the seed was produced and you're just going to plant it and grow it the way you want to grow it? Usually organic seed costs a little bit more, just like organic produce in the grocery stores cost more. You can get a pelleted seed, an uncoated seed, or a treated seed. An uncoated seed is just a plain seed. A pelleted seed, and this is done to very small seeds so that they are easy to handle. So they put a coating of a kind of a clay around the seed so that instead of being like a 1/16 of an inch long, the seed is maybe more like an 1/8 of an inch, so it's easier to pick up and handle. A treated seed, on the other hand, is something that has like a fungicide treated around the seed or sprayed on the seed, so that if you plant it at a time, like say it's really cool and wet in the spring, that the seed does not get a fungus and die before it gets grown up enough to handle itself. So a treated seed is often a bright color so that you know that that treat has been seeded. It might be a bright green or a bright purple or a bright blue. And those kinds of seeds have been treated. So you don't, especially if you handle them, you want to make sure that you wash your hands and everything afterwards. You want to look for the disease resistance. Some plants get certain diseases and they're more prone to them. For example, you have phlox that get mildew on them. You get squash that gets mildew on it. Tomatoes that get blight. And so some plants are more resistant to that than others. Most of them are not totally resistant. So if you have the right conditions and you have the right organism there to infect the plant, it may still get it, but some of them are much more resistant to that. You can get open pollinated, heirloom, or hybrid seeds also. And what those are, open pollinated, that means it's a plant that has been grown for many years. Most heirloom vegetables are open pollinated, but a lot of other ones are too. And that means if that plant is pollinated, say it's a tomato and it's pollinated, and then you keep the seeds from that tomato, it will produce the same kind of tomato again the next year. An heirloom is a variety that has been around for at least 50 or 60 years. It kind of counts since about 1950. If that vegetable has been around and been grown for 50 to 60 years, it's considered an heirloom. And many heirlooms are very different than some of the vegetables we grow now. There are heirloom tomatoes that are like purple and green and all kinds of different colors. A hybrid is not a GMO. People kind of get these two confused. A hybrid means that, let's say you have a tomato that tastes really, really good, but every year, just about the time they're getting ripe, it gets a blight or a fungal disease. And so the plant dies without producing a whole lot of those really, really nice tomatoes. So they might take a plant where the tomatoes don't taste maybe quite as good, but the plant is pretty tough and it usually doesn't get that blight. So they will take some pollen from one plant and put it on the flower of the other plant, and hoping that by crossing those two, you'll get a tomato that tastes good, but also is kind of disease resistant. So that's what a hybrid is. A hybrid will not come true. If you take the seeds from a hybrid and plant them the following year, you're very likely to get a plant again that was like one of its parents. So hybrid seeds cannot be saved from one year to the other. Open pollinated and heirloom seeds can be saved from one year to another. A GMO is really totally different. They actually take a part of the genetic material of one plant and insert it into the genetic material of another plant. And so it's a whole different process. So a hybrid seed is not a GMO seed. It's what hybridizers have been doing for thousands of years, crossing plants in order to get a better plant, just like we do with animals to get a better beef cow or a faster horse. So that's the difference between the three of those. Then you can also find vegetables that grow better when it's really cold, if you have a cold season, or if you have a really hot season. Or for example, you're growing the vegetable in Wisconsin versus growing it in Texas. So some plants have better tolerance of heat or cold than other plants. Yield, some plants are heavier yielders than others, and very often a seed catalog will say heavy yielder, which means you're probably going to get more beans off of those plants than you will of another kind of bean plant. The nutritional value, some vegetables have been grown to increase the nutritional value, like carotene, beta carotene in carrots, for example, or lycopene in tomatoes. So some vegetables, when you look in a seed catalog, you'll find actually differences in nutritional value. And then, of course, the thing that we grow most of our vegetables for is taste. And when we're talking about flowers, again, you're looking for the appearance, the color of the flower, and that sort of thing, how big the flower gets, in addition to some of the other things we just talked about. Let's see. I'm going to fast forward us here. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a kind of a seed catalog description. And I couldn't copy the whole description. It didn't come out really well. But I'm going to show you some of these things when you're looking at a seed catalog. The species name up here is the species is the kind of vegetable that it is, or the kind of flower that it is. And then you will see that it also has a cultivar name. This one is called Butter Baby because it's a butternut squash, but it's a small squash. As you can see in the picture here, it's only about as big as what you can hold in your hand. The next thing you're going to look for is if it's organic, it will say that. So you will be able to tell right away whether a seed is organic. Also down here, it says again, US certified organic seed. F1, if you see that in a description, that means it's a hybrid seed. So if I were to plant this squash and I kept the seeds from it, I probably wouldn't get a Butter Baby squash next year. If it doesn't say F1 or it doesn't say hybrid, I could keep the seeds and plant them again next year and probably get pretty close to the same kind of squash I got this year. Then most seed catalogs also have some distinguishing characteristics. And seed catalogs tend to get a little flowery in their descriptions because they want to be really enthusiastic about their vegetables. So you can see an adorable butternut squash with wonderful flavor and good color. But then it also tells you some other things about that. If you're growing vegetables to sell, community supported agriculture, that's what CSA stands for, and it's people who get people to pay them a certain amount of money, and then every week during the summer, they get a box of vegetables for what they pay for the farmer. So it helps the farmer pay for his expenses during the year when he's growing the vegetables, and the people get their vegetables all year. So this one is perfect, it says, for CSA boxes and roadside stands because it looks like a butternut squash, and because it's small, because sometimes people, you know, they just want a squash that's big enough for one meal. Then it goes on to tell you what the fruits are going to look like. By the way, all vegetables produce fruits. Tomatoes are fruits, beans are fruits, peas are fruits. So it'll say fruits are like 4 to 6 inches long and offer about 2 servings each. Next one is got some plant characteristics. This is a plant that has short vines. So instead of going maybe 10 feet, it might only go 3. It stores 3 to 4 months, which is important for some people. And it tells you about how big the fruits are and the average yield, the number of fruits per plant. It's got some disease resistant, intermediate resistance to powdery mildew. That means it's got some resistance. It's not highly resistant, but it does have some. And very often you will see a bunch of letters after a description in a seed catalog. Like it'll say DM or it'll say LB. DM would be downy mildew, LB would be late blight. So often there's a key somewhere in the seed catalog that tells you what those letters mean. And this one tells you how many seeds you're going to get per pound, or if you buy a packet of seeds, how many seeds will be in it. So the seed count or the package size. Some other information that was given to this by this seed catalog, it gives you the Latin name of the plant, which is important sometimes when you're growing flowers, because the common name of a flower varies from different parts of the country a lot of times. And so you want to make sure that you're getting the plant that you think you're getting. This says 100 days to maturity. So this takes quite a while for this squash to grow that far. So it takes almost the full growing season for it to reach maturity. Days to maturity refers to the number of days from when you plant the seed in the ground, if you direct sow, or the number of days after you put the transplant into the ground, if you start with a plant. Days to maturity is important because in our part of the country, we don't have unlimited days to maturity. Its life cycle is an annual, and there it tells you the disease resistance code is PM, which is powdery mildew, that it's a hybrid, and that it's an organic seed. So some catalogs, the information is arranged differently sometimes in catalogs, but it's, most of it's there. Here's an example for beans, and we'll go through the same thing. This is a bush bean, so the species name is bean. It's got a variety name or a cultivar name called top crop. This number, the blue number, happens to be the catalog number for this particular seed. And then some other descriptions here. This is an heirloom, which means it's been around for at least 50 or 60 years. In fact, way back in 1950, it was an AAS winner. And that's a prize or a designation, I should say, given to a vegetable or a flower when it does especially well in a wide variety of conditions, and it's pretty consistent in how well it grows, no matter what kind of growing conditions it has. So an AAS winner is probably an easy to grow vegetable and one that would probably be a good one for a beginning gardener to use. The plant characteristics here, so it's vigorous 15 to 18 inch bushes, which means it's probably going to have a lot of leaves. It's best for canning, freezing, or table use, and it sets a heavy crop. So this is one that's going to produce a lot. The yield will be quite big. It's going to describe the fruit characteristics. So the pods are 6 to 7 inches long, round, straight, meaty, and free from strings or fibers. So this is, when you talk about a string bean, this is a bean that does not have a string. It's got a resistance to a particular organism that likes to attack beans, bean mosaic. And this was some additional information that was below the picture in the catalog. It says it's to plant it in the spring, planting depth, beans and peas. Often we put an inoculant in with it. It helps the seeds to start growing and producing the leguminous roots that beans and peas have. It has no fragrance. It has edible parts, the pods. It has disease resistant. It grows 18 to 24 inches tall. It's green color, green fruit color. Takes about 7 to 10 days for it to pop out of the ground. It starts producing beans in 50 days, and they should be spaced 2 inches apart in the row. And then it gives you, again, scientific names and that sort of thing. Notice that this one has a restriction. It can't be shipped to Hawaii or Idaho for some reason. So, and they usually don't tell you why, but generally it's some kind of maybe disease issues or something. I know Hawaii is very, very strict with what comes into their state because they're an island nation and they want to keep out everything that doesn't belong there. This description is also used for flowers, which is why the fragrant is in here. You want to know whether your flowers have fragrance, and the foliage and the fruit color might make a difference to flower growers. Is it a green or is it a mottled foliage? What color is the flower or the fruit going to be? This one now has, this was corn. Corn is a whole critter unto itself if you grow corn. There are actually 4 different kinds of corn, and it's really, really hard to tell. There's an SE plus, there's an SYN, and when you plant these, you have to be careful about which ones you plant with which ones, because the pollen of one sometimes does not produce the kernels on the ear if it has a wrong pollinator next to it. So, but what I showed you here is that we have anywhere from 68 days corn here all the way to 81 days. So it makes a big difference sometimes in how soon this crop is going to be ready to eat. You see here, there's one that's organic, the OG. In this catalog, that means it's organic. All of these corn plants are hybrid, so you can't take the corn kernels and grow them again. Some of them you can see here have been treated, and some of them have not been treated. So you could have your choice here about whether you want to have it treated or an untreated one. Up here, you can have organic or conventional seeds. So these are some of the things that you can look at when you're looking at a seed catalog. So there's a whole bunch of information. I'm going to see if I can get my picture down here. This, for example, now is what you get when you go to the store, like big box store or maybe in a grocery store. You get a seed package, and this is what it has on it. This one is actually pretty good. The radish picture is on the front, and then the back of the seed package is on the right side here. And it does tell you how deep to plant it, how far apart, how far between the rows, how many days till the little seeds should pop out of the ground. Tells you want to thin them to 2 inches apart, and it's going to take 25 days for them to grow into a radish. And it tells you a little bit here about the growing conditions. It's good to plant it early in the spring, and it likes cool, moist soil. And then again, maybe late in the fall. Radishes do not grow well in the summer. Also on the side here, going up the right side, it will tell you when it was packed. So this was packed for 2019, actually 2 years ago, and it's to be sold by November of 19. That doesn't mean that the seed is not any good after that. A lot of seeds are good for several years afterwards. But if you notice this is all the information you're going to get about the plant that you're going to grow. And so when you get a seed packet and you buy it off the shelf in a store, this is all you're going to get. Here's one for arugula. And this is arranged a little bit differently, but it has the same information. It says it should grow in full sun. It's going to take 35 days for it to grow. If you want to plant it in a container, you should put 4 plants in a 12-inch container. Tells you how deep to plant it, tells you how far apart to plant it, and a little bit here. Again, this grows better in cooler weather. And this one has something in Spanish too. And then you can see also, if I move our picture over here, it's got a sell-by date also. Notice that the seeds come from Italy. So what I'm looking at is that a seed catalog will give you a lot more information. So in addition to what I showed you, some of these examples of seed descriptions, the catalog itself oftentimes has very detailed, or the website has very detailed information about how to grow and harvest and problems to look for on different kinds of plants that you won't get on a plain catalog description or package description. So one other thing, you can also get seeds in what's called a seed tape. And they're not available for all vegetables, but they're often available for the smaller seeded vegetables like radishes and carrots. And these are, what it is like a very thin paper strip, much like toilet tissue, where the seeds has been placed between 2 layers and they've been lightly glued together. It makes it very easy to handle. And you can see there that you just put this strip down where you want your row to be, and then you cover it with soil. And so you don't have to worry about spacing the seeds or trying to pick them up when they're really small. But they're usually moderately more expensive because someone has had to put all those seeds on that tape. This is an alternative to pelleted seeds. So remember I talked about, you can get a pelleted seed, which means it has a coating put on it so that it's a little bit bigger and easier to handle. This would be an alternative to a pelleted seed. If we had a face-to-face class, I would like to have had people in the class actually looking at some of the seed catalogs and asking more questions. I don't know, does anyone else have any questions right now?
Nothing so far, but we'll give them a minute in case somebody's typing right now.
Okay. Kind of do a little summary here then. When you're selecting seeds, you need to consider 3 things. What's your garden site and its growing conditions? What you want to plant, or what do you want in the plant's characteristics? Do you want a tall plant, a small plant, whatever? And what the descriptions are telling you about the plant you are choosing in the catalog. So those are some things that you need to look at when you're buying seeds from a seed catalog.
We do have a question.
Okay.
Do you recommend any particular seed companies?
There are, on the resource page, there is a handout called Cultivars for Wisconsin, something like that. And that one has a list of seed companies in the back. Also on that resource list, I listed several other seed companies that are pretty widely known that were not on that list. As a member of Extension, I can't really recommend one over the other. But you can, and almost all those seed catalogs have websites too. So you might go on there on the website and see if there's any particular one that you maybe like. It's easier to read or something like that. It's easier to set up for information. But as a master gardener and of the University Extension, I can't really recommend a particular catalog one over another.
Speaking of the resources that Donna mentioned, I would appreciate it if you could use either the Q&A or the chat, preferably the chat for this specific question. But did anybody have any issues with accessing the resources? They're always provided, but I used the built-in Zoom registration instead of an outside registration system. So things might have looked a little bit different. And I want to make sure that we didn't have any issues getting a hold of those things. If there were issues, then it's something for me to check into. We do have another question for you, Donna.
Sure.
We're looking for more explanation on the F1 status and what other types would we see with this type of abbreviation?
You would see it in a lot of vegetables. Particularly squashes, corn, tomatoes, peppers. Those ones I know have a tremendous amount of hybrids, but you'll see it in some of the other vegetables too. And what they're doing is actually crossing two plants, trying to get a third kind of plant with some different kind of characteristics. Like I said, you might have a tomato that tastes really wonderful, but the plant almost always dies before you get all the tomatoes ripe. And then you might have another plant that's pretty hardy, but the tomatoes don't maybe taste as good. So by using the pollen from one and putting that in the flower of the other plant, you're hoping that the tomato that grows from that cross will hold seeds that have both good flavor and are a tougher plant. Do you understand that? It's kind of like if you were, in biology somewhere in high school and you talk about genetics, that's what it is. That answers the question.
They're not saying no, but they might be typing. We haven't had any other questions pop up while you were answering those two.
Okay, then I have a little short one, another short PowerPoint on growing microgreens. I thought I would throw that in because I didn't think it would be quite an hour here with this particular presentation. So if we have no more questions on this one, I will bring up the other presentation and we will get that one going. Let's see. I got this header up here on the top. Oh, there we go. We can move that a little bit. All right. I had another video to go with this one. I don't know if we're going to try that or not, but I think we'll probably just go with me. Microgreens are something that's becoming quite a bit of a fad lately. It's not sprouts, and the person that I had the video from was explaining the difference between sprouts and microgreens. Sprouts, when you do sprouts, you take the seeds and you put them in a jar and they're sitting in water or moist, or they're very moist, And then when the seeds start to sprout and that first little shoot comes out of the seed, that's a sprout. And so you eat the seed along with that part that's growing. What they found in the last 10 years was there was a number of people who were getting sick because the seed had some bacteria or something on it. And then the people ate the seeds along with the sprout. And so they were getting forms of food poisoning. And so they've suggested that we do something now called growing microgreens. And what we're doing here is we're growing the plant a little bit beyond the sprout stage so that the plant actually grows and it has 1 or 2 sets of true leaves on it. The picture you can see on the right side are some microgreens. This is way beyond what we would call a sprout. This is a microgreen. The first leaves that come out of a seed are called cotyledons, and they're not true leaves. If you look at a plant, you'll notice that they are not shaped anything like the next 2 leaves that come out when the plant starts growing. Once the next 2 leaves come out, that set of leaves, or maybe one more set of 2 leaves, that's when you harvest a microgreen and you cut it off. You don't eat the seed, you're only eating the stem and the leaves on it. So that's a much safer form of sprouting type vegetable to eat. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to go about doing it. It's really not a hard process at all. And some people, if you like to garden and you can't do it in the wintertime, this is one thing you can do in the wintertime with just some minimum of things that you need to grow it. You need a shallow container, and it could be like a takeout container, anything like a shallow, kind of shallow and wide. And then you need potting mix, and you need clean water. Most people will be in the wintertime, you'll be using it out of your faucet anyway, but you wouldn't want to use like rainwater to grow your sprouts. You need a cover for the container. And once they're sprouted, you need a bright window or a brightly lit area. So how do you do it? Or, well, what do you do? You can take the seeds from herbs, and if you grow those sprouts, the microgreens will taste like the herb because you're growing them. It's really a very, very short, tiny herb. There are other kinds that you can do. There are flower seeds that you can sprout, and they kind of taste like the flower too. You can do vegetables like peas and beans, and popcorn. Popcorn, it says, tastes sweet. Buckwheat has kind of a nutty flavor. Sunflower seeds have kind of a nutty, mild flavor also. When you buy the seeds for this, you're going to want to buy quite a bit of a larger quantity than you would if you're planting them in the garden, because you sow the seeds very, very thick on the medium. So you would moisten the potting mix. There's also a kind of a mat that you can buy that's about 1/2 inch thick called a Terra fiber mat, I believe. And it's a one-use thing. You can put it in your compost pile when you're done, but you have to get a different one for each time you grow the microgreens. And they cost about $3 each. But you can also do it with regular potting mix, the same kind of mix you would use to pot up plants in the summertime or your house plants. You fill the container to a depth of about 1 inch or a little more, and then you densely sprinkle the seeds over the potting mix. So you want at least a couple seeds per square inch. More dense for smaller seeds and less dense for bigger seeds. Some of the bigger seeds, like peas and beans, will sprout faster if they're soaked for a little bit before you do it, but they'll sprout anyway. It'll just take longer. Then you cover with just a sprinkle of potting mix. The little seeds, you probably don't even have to cover. If the seeds say it needs light for germination, then you don't cover it at all. but you do want to pat the seeds down so that they make good contact with the soil. Then you mist it a little bit. Remember, you have to start with wet potting mix. If you start with dry potting mix and you try and mist it, the seeds are going to flow all over the place and end up in big bunches and just run across the top of the soil. Then you put the cover on, and takeout containers work good because a lot of times they have a cover on them anyway. If they don't, you can just put some plastic wrap over the top. Some people have used a piece of glass. It doesn't have to even be transparent because the plants don't need anything until they start to grow. Once you see a little bit of growth coming from the seeds, you uncover it, water it enough to keep the planting medium moist, and then they're ready to harvest in about 10 to 12 days. So it's a really quick turnaround. And what you do when you harvest them, you just grab them by the top and cut them off just above the soil level. And then you want to wash the microgreens before you eat them, of course, just like any other vegetable product. But you're not eating the seeds, which makes it a safer alternative to sprouts. And they can be used in soups and salads and just as a vegetable, stews, on sandwiches. So it's kind of a neat way to grow things and get a crop that you can grow in the winter time. So any questions about the microgreens?
We'll give everyone a moment just in case they have any responses. Donna, was this about the end of the presentation then?
Yep.
I am going to take a moment also to recommend that if you have any topics that you would like us to feature in upcoming months, the next couple have been mapped out so that we're kind of ahead of ourselves, but we want to hear what everybody would like to see. The next ones will be that we will start planning will be the ones more in late summer, midsummer, early summer to midsummer. Here we go. So if there is anything specific that you would like to see that would be specifically interesting during that point, go ahead and let us know. But if there are any other topics other than that, please let us know as well. And if you don't think of any right now, you can always send me an email at bpearson@marshfieldlibrary.org or send a message to us online, whether it's through Facebook or just grabbing whatever contact email we have on the website. Whatever works for you to be able to let us know. If you're signed up for our monthly newsletters, you can also just respond to that if you think of something. I want to make sure that if you don't think of anything, but you think of something at some point, you know there are plenty of ways to let us know, because we want to make sure we keep getting those ideas for what people are currently finding interesting. And we did have Barb say thank you again, always helpful.
Okay. One last thing, I always want to remind people when I do a program, if you're ever looking for information at any time, and this can be anything from crops to sowing to food, the University Extension Service is a wonderful, wonderful place to find reliable research-based information at any time. So you would type in what you're looking for and add the word extension after it. For example, when I was getting this program ready, I typed in growing microgreens extension and popped up a bunch of articles about growing microgreens, and it sometimes brings up videos, it brings up articles that the extension has published. So it's a really, really good way to get really reliable information other than trying to follow somebody's blog and you have no idea, you know, whether they really know what they're talking about or not. So it's a good, safe way to get your information.
All right, I don't see any comments or other questions coming through, so I think we are probably good to finish this evening's program. I'm going to just take another moment to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I hope you'll join us for our next one. Thank you.
Yep, it'll be sea starting indoors.
A timely one.
Yes.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.